I am a former Army interrogator, human intelligence collector. I was trained by the United States government to analyze your language, body language, posture to identify deception. I did it in the real world through interrogations, through source operations, and through strategic debriefings. I've got tons of certifications. I'm an expert at this.
You guys get ready to leave out of there, getting towed out.
Yeah.
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, Nolan was, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
Last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. That is critically important information. All right, right here, he's talking about when his buddy Bart pulls out his buddy Wyatt's boat. So Bart is on one boat and he's pulling out Wyatt's boat. Wyatt's boat is the one that you've heard about was taken on water and sinking, and that's why they had to leave Horn Island. I want you to pay attention to this.
To where we're out of all this, all this chaos, because we left at 4:30 and there was still.
We left at 4:30. We left at 4:30. This guy just said that the last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. Very specific time. Now, how did he know it was 3 o'clock? Brandon Tatum didn't ask him that. If this was an interrogation, that's a key question I would ask. How do you know it was 3 o'clock?
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, Nolan was, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
And Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. Katie.
That's Katie McCormick that he's talking about. Katie McCormick said that's not true, but let's listen. This is at 3 o'clock. This happened at 3 o'clock.
And Katie, Nolan was sitting there, and the last time I saw him, I looked at Nolan, and Nolan was like shaking his head, laughing. That was the last time I laid eyes on him. But when we were leaving,
well, when we were leaving, so it would be 4:30, because he's already said we were leaving at 4:30.
Nolan was sitting by the boat.
Nolan was sitting by the boat. How do you know, Warren, that Nolan was sitting by the boat? The last time you laid eyes on him was at 3 o'clock. It's now 4:30. This is your timeline. Timeline is everything. At this part of the story, he's at 4:30. But he just said less than a minute ago, 2 minutes ago, that the last time he saw Nolan was 3 o'clock.
Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and
how do you know that? The last time you laid eyes, your exact words, on him was 3 o'clock. You're now talking about 4:30. Now listen what happens next.
My buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving.
Now, in the interest of honest analysis here, if they were both on the boat and he heard his buddy yelling at Nolan, not him, by the way. Warren wasn't yelling at Nolan. Even in his own story, he wasn't looking for Nolan or yelling for Nolan. And in the beginning of part 1 of the interview, he says, Nolan was like a brother to me. He was my best friend. More than a friend, though. He was like a brother to me. But Warren's not the one looking for Nolan, not the one yelling for Nolan. He don't even go over and lay eyes on him again, according to his own story that he's telling us. But he hears his buddy saying, hey, Nolan.
The boat's having issues. And no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat. Get on the boat. And Nolan said, no, I'm staying out here. I'm going to ride in with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear. It's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get on.
So your buddy asked Nolan multiple times and you never did. Your brother, your best friend. But notice he didn't say Nolan said, I'm going to stay here with Katie who I'm sitting with next to the boat. No part of that exchange would have given Warren the details to know that Nolan was sitting by the boat with Katie, which was his exact words. He contradicted himself. That's blatant deception. He needs to be immediately exploited and interrogated.
He said it once, and nobody caught it. Then he said the complete opposite, less than 2 minutes later, in the same interview, to the same interviewer. 2 statements, 1 person, and they cannot both be true. That is where this story ends up. But to understand why that single contradiction matters as much as it does, you need to understand who Nolan Wells was, what happened on July 4th off the coast of Mississippi, and why a 90-minute window on a crowded holiday beach became the most contested stretch of time in one of the most watched missing persons cases this country has seen in years. Because buried inside a friendly, sympathetic interview that was designed to clear someone's name, one of Nolan's closest friends said something that unravels the entire account he was trying to give. Not because of what investigators said, not because of what the family said, because of what he said, in his own words, back to back, and the two versions cannot coexist. That is what we are going to walk through today, carefully, methodically, with every fact sourced and every claim separated from confirmed documentation, because this case has been buried under so much noise, so much speculation, and so many viral distortions that the actual truth of what is documented has become harder to see, not easier, the more people have talked about it. If you want the next update on this case the moment it drops, subscribing to DAV Crime Records is the only way that happens. It costs nothing, it takes 2 seconds, and for a channel this size, it genuinely changes what we are able to do. Hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video before we go any further. Now let's get into it. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He had just graduated from Ocean Springs High School in Jackson County, Mississippi, and by every account from people who actually knew him, not people arguing about him online, he was exactly the kind of teenager parents hope they are raising. He played football. He had started the enrollment process at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he planned to continue playing that fall. His future was not abstract. It was specific. He had a program, a position on a roster, and a plan that was already in motion. People who knew him described a particular quality that showed up consistently across completely unrelated sources. He was not necessarily the loudest person in a room, but he was the one who remembered your name and asked how your week was going. Teachers reached out to his family after his death, unprompted. Classmates did the same. Teammates described someone who showed up early and cheered louder for other people's plays than his own. His best friend, Javon Williams, described a behavioral pattern in an on-record interview with the Biloxi Sun-Herald that he then repeated independently to CNN. If Nolan rode somewhere with you, he came back with you. Williams did not describe this as something Nolan occasionally did. He described it as something Nolan had done every single time, throughout the years they had known each other. That specific detail matters enormously to what comes later in this case, and we will come back to exactly why. The night before the 4th of July, Nolan cooked salmon for his parents. His mother, Christine Wansley, has confirmed this in multiple interviews since his death. He hugged her, told her he loved her, and left to spend the night at a friend's house ahead of the holiday trip. That was the last time she saw her son. Not a dramatic goodbye, an ordinary one. The kind every parent has experienced 100 times without ever once thinking it might be the last. Hold on to that person as we walk through what comes next, because it gets complicated. It gets contested. And in the comment sections of every video covering this case, it gets genuinely ugly. But underneath every argument about timelines and phones and who said what, there is an 18-year-old who cooked his parents' dinner 2 nights before he died. That fact is not in dispute, no matter which side of this you land on. On the morning of July 4th, Nolan headed out with a group of friends toward Horn Island, a barrier island located roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, reachable only by private boat. The island is uninhabited. No buildings, no reliable cell towers. On a holiday weekend, particularly the 4th of July, it draws hundreds of boaters who anchor close together in the shallow water and spend the day on the sand. By multiple reports, upward of 200 people were out there that day. According to GPS data obtained by CBS News and confirmed through the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat carrying Nolan's group left the dock at approximately 9:56 that morning and arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. That part of the day is not disputed by anyone. The group spread across 3 boats, a Triton owned by a friend named Wyatt, a Palm Beach carrying about 4 people, and a larger tide line operated by a friend named Bart, which carried the bulk of the group, somewhere between 10 and 16 people depending on who is counting. The afternoon unfolded the way 4th of July afternoons on that stretch of the Gulf Coast tend to unfold. Music, Boats anchored close together, groups drifting in and out of each other's company. Somewhere in that crowd, according to family accounts and later corroborated through multiple statements, Nolan met a young woman named Katie. He spent part of the afternoon in her company. That much is not in dispute. At some point in the mid-afternoon, something went wrong with the Triton. According to statements from a parent of one of the friends, corroborated by dispatch audio obtained by NBC News through a public records request, the boat's bilge pump failed. The battery was submerged under standing water. The motor would not trim properly. The excess water inside the hull had nowhere to go because the pump had stopped working. The boat was at serious risk of becoming disabled on the water, 10 miles from shore. That dispatch audio is confirmed. It was obtained through official channels. It captures the boat operator radioing Sea Tow for towing assistance from the west tip of Horn Island. This is not a claim from either side of the debate surrounding this case. It is documented audio from a government agency. According to GPS data, the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon. Nolan Wells was not on it. According to statements from friends who were present and later spoke with investigators, Nolan chose to remain behind, planning to catch a later ride back to the mainland with a separate group, possibly connected to Katie and the people who had brought her to the island. That is the account the friend group has given consistently since this story became public. Nolan's mother disputes key parts of that account, and the disagreement is not vague. It is specific. It concerns what Nolan said, to whom, and at what time. And those are details that should be straightforward to verify if everyone's memory is actually aligned. Later that night, around 11 in the evening, one of Nolan's friends contacted the Coast Guard. Christine Wansley reported her son missing to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office that same night. A search involving the Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and volunteer groups including the United Cajun Navy launched the following morning. On July 6th, a National Park Service ranger found Nolan's body in the water off the island's northwestern tip. He was identified through dental records, not through visual identification. The Jackson County coroner confirmed there were no immediately obvious signs of physical trauma. The sheriff's office stated publicly in the earliest days of the case that there was no information at that time suggesting a crime had occurred. That is the confirmed skeleton. Everything else, every argument, every interview, every piece of contested audio, every social media theory, hangs off that documented framework. And it is important to keep that framework visible because this case has been distorted, badly, by people on every side, mixing confirmed facts with unverified claims until the two became nearly indistinguishable. Before this case reached national attention, before millions of strangers were picking apart interview clips frame by frame, what pushed it out of local coverage and into a national conversation was a combination of elements that rarely appear together in a single story. A young victim with a promising future, a friend group whose account shifted and in places contradicted itself, a family that felt, rightly or wrongly, that the initial investigation moved too quickly toward a conclusion. Viral claims, some accurate and some demonstrably false, spreading faster than any official source could address them, and prominent public figures lending their platforms to the family's cause, which widened the audience further and faster than this type of case typically reaches. That is not a criticism of the attention. Nolan Wells deserves exactly this level of scrutiny applied to finding out what actually happened to him. But it does mean that separating what is real from what is amplified requires more discipline here than in a typical case. Because the noise is louder, the incentives to distort details for engagement are stronger, and every party involved, investigators, family, friends, and media alike, is operating under a level of public pressure that most people never experience even once in their lives, let alone while simultaneously grieving someone they cared about. In the days after Nolan's body was recovered, 3 friends who had been on the island agreed to a sit-down interview. It was conducted by Brandon Tatum, a media personality with a substantial platform. Not a law enforcement interview, not a deposition, a publicly released conversation in which the friends were given the opportunity to tell their account directly to an audience of millions. One of those friends is a man named Warren, and inside Warren's account, delivered calmly, in detail, with apparent emotional consistency throughout, is a contradiction so specific and so structural that it does not read like a confused memory or a nervous slip. It reads like two incompatible stories about the same moment, told minutes apart, without realizing they had just canceled each other out. Here is what Warren said. When asked about Nolan's location during the chaos of the boat crisis and the departure preparation, Warren stated clearly that the last time he saw Nolan was at 3 o'clock. He gave a specific time, not approximately mid-afternoon, not sometime before we left. 3 o'clock. He described what he saw at that moment. Nolan was with Katie. He was in good spirits, shaking his head, laughing. Warren said he made eye contact with Nolan, exchanged a brief joke, and then that was it. In his own words, that was the last time he laid eyes on him. Less than 2 minutes later in the same interview, Warren described what was happening as the group was preparing to leave at 4:30, and in that description, he stated, without apparent hesitation, that Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl. He described Nolan's location, his position, who he was with, at 4:30. Stop there, because those two statements cannot coexist. If the last time Warren laid eyes on Nolan was at 3 o'clock, then Warren has no basis for describing Nolan's location at 4:30. He did not see him. By his own account, he was not looking for him, was not the one calling out to him, never walked over to where Nolan was. In Warren's own telling, it was a different friend, referred to as his buddy, who was yelling for Nolan to get on the boat, not Warren. Warren, who described Nolan as like a brother to him, more than a friend, his best friend. That same Warren was not the one looking, not the one calling out, not the one who even walked over to verify where Nolan was. And yet, he told the interviewer, with the same confident specificity he used to describe the moment at 3 o'clock, that at 4:30, Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, a scene he had no documented basis to describe because, by his own preceding statement, he was not there to see it. That is the contradiction. Two statements, one speaker, less than 2 minutes apart, and they cannot both be true. There is another layer worth examining before we move forward. Warren's description of what was communicated to Nolan during the 4:30 moment relies entirely on what he says he heard his friend yelling, "Nolan, get on the boat. Nolan, we are leaving," multiple times, repeated urgently, and Nolan's response, according to Warren, was a verbal refusal. He said he was staying. He said he would ride back with someone else. But none of that exchange, even if exactly accurate, would have given Warren the specific visual detail of Nolan sitting next to the boat with Katie. A voice exchange heard from a distance does not produce a visual snapshot of where someone is positioned and who is next to them. It produces, at most, the knowledge that someone responded when called. The scene Warren described requires him to have seen it, and he already told the interviewer he had not seen Nolan since 3 o'clock. This is not a minor inconsistency. This is not a case of slightly misremembering a detail under the stress of grief and public scrutiny. This is two mutually exclusive claims about the same person at two different times, delivered as though they are both equally grounded in personal observation, when by Warren's own testimony, only one of them could be. The window that contains all of this is 90 minutes long. 3 o'clock to 4:31, 90 minutes on a crowded beach with roughly 200 people moving in and out of each other's company. Nobody tracking anyone. Nobody thinking any of those small interactions would ever matter. Genuine memory of an unremarkable stretch of time on a chaotic holiday beach usually comes back imprecise. It comes back in impressions and fragments. It does not typically come back with the clean, confident specificity of a visual scene at a precise moment. When a person's account includes that kind of precision about a moment, they also say they did not witness. That is where investigators and analysts focus. Not because the contradiction proves anything on its own, but because it opens a question that the rest of the account does not answer. And in a case where a young man who had never once in his life left his friends behind ended up alone in the water 10 miles from shore, unanswered questions matter. 2 statements, same interview, same person, less than 2 minutes apart, and they point in 2 completely different directions. Warren told a media interviewer that the last time he laid eyes on Nolan Wells was 3 o'clock. Then, moments later, he described in specific physical detail exactly where Nolan was sitting and who he was with at 4:30. He cannot have seen Nolan for the last time at 3 and also know precisely where Nolan was positioned 90 minutes later. One of those statements is not accurate, and the interviewer never stopped to ask which one. But here is what almost no one talking about that contradiction has bothered to do. They have not asked what it actually means. They have not considered the possibility that it means nothing at all. And they have not placed it next to the second, entirely separate contradiction that lives right beside it, one that involves a completely different person telling a completely different version of the same final conversation Nolan Wells ever had. Before we go any further into what Warren said, we need to be precise about who Warren is in the context of this investigation and what he is not. Warren has not been charged with any crime. He has not been named by any law enforcement agency as a suspect. His mother, a sitting judge in the area, has spoken publicly and confirmed that Warren cooperated fully with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. We are discussing him by name because his account was given voluntarily, on camera, to a public platform viewed by millions of people. Avoiding his name while dissecting his exact words would be its own kind of dishonesty. But nothing in what follows is an accusation. It is a factual breakdown of an inconsistency in a public statement. And we are going to walk through both the concerning explanation and the innocent one, because a fair analysis demands holding both possibilities at the same time. Here is the innocent explanation, stated as fairly as it can be stated. Warren may have compressed 2 separate memories into a single narrated moment that sounds more precise than it actually was. His last genuine one-on-one interaction with Nolan, the moment he describes at 3 o'clock where Nolan was laughing and shaking his head, may have been a real memory. And his description of Nolan sitting by the boat at 4:30 may not have been a direct visual observation at all, but rather a general awareness assembled from hearing his friend yelling Nolan's name, hearing Nolan's response, and filling in a mental picture of the scene based on context rather than personal eyesight. People do this constantly when recounting chaotic, emotional days under the pressure of a camera and a stranger's questions. Research into eyewitness memory, conducted across decades of forensic psychology, consistently shows that the act of publicly retelling an emotional event tends to smooth out a timeline's rough edges rather than preserve them accurately. People unconsciously fill gaps with what feels narratively coherent rather than what they actually perceived in the moment. That is not deception. It is a well-documented feature of how the human mind processes and reconstructs stressful experiences after the fact. And it means Warren's contradiction could very easily be an artifact of exactly that process. A genuinely honest person's memory polishing itself into a cleaner story than the messier, more uncertain reality of that afternoon actually was. Now here is the more concerning read, and we owe it to you to state this honestly as well. If Warren did have direct visual contact with Nolan at 4:30, specific enough to describe his exact position near the boat and who he was sitting with, then the statement "the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock" was not accurate, and the interview never circled back to correct or explain that discrepancy. In a case where the family has already raised concerns about missing content on Nolan's phone, where a Coast Guard call was not placed until roughly 7 hours after the friends reportedly last saw him alive, and where an autopsy has taken weeks to finalize, a witness statement that does not align with itself internally is the kind of detail that deserves a direct follow-up question from trained investigators. Not from an online reaction channel, not from a media personality conducting a sympathetic conversation, from law enforcement officers in a formal, recorded, individual interview setting. We cannot tell you which explanation is the correct one. Nobody watching a single recorded media interview from the outside is qualified to make that determination. And that includes every reaction channel, every podcast, and every comment section that has already rendered a verdict in either direction. What we can tell you is this. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has confirmed that formal, separate witness interviews are part of the active investigation. That procedural detail matters specifically because investigators interview witnesses individually rather than in groups for a documented reason. Shared, repeated retellings, including retellings given publicly on camera before law enforcement has completed its own process, can shape and reshape memory even without anyone intending to deceive. If Warren's account to investigators, given separately and under different conditions, matches what he told Brandon Tatum on camera, that is meaningful in one direction. If it does not match, that is meaningful in a different direction. As of this recording, we do not know which of those outcomes has occurred because law enforcement has not released that information publicly, and we are not going to pretend otherwise. There is also a structural reason this contradiction slipped past, unchallenged in the moment it was actually spoken, and it has nothing to do with Warren. Brandon Tatum is a media personality with a large established platform. He is not a trained investigative interviewer, and he is not a law enforcement officer conducting a formal interrogation. That distinction matters independently of anyone's opinion of him personally. A formal law enforcement interview is built around a specific discipline. When a subject's own timeline contradicts itself, a trained interviewer is taught to stop, circle back, and ask the subject to reconcile the two statements before moving forward. That did not happen here. When Warren moved from the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock to a specific, detailed description of Nolan's location at 4:30, the conversation simply continued forward without the obvious follow-up question. Which one was it? That is not necessarily a criticism of intent. It may simply reflect the difference between a supportive conversation designed to give a grieving friend space to speak and a formal investigative interview designed to stress test a timeline. Those are two fundamentally different kinds of conversations with fundamentally different goals. But it is the actual structural reason this contradiction passed without challenge in real time and only became widely discussed after other people reviewing the footage with a different kind of scrutiny caught what the original conversation let through. Warren's inconsistency does not exist in isolation. It sits directly alongside a second, entirely separate contradiction involving the young woman Nolan reportedly spent his final afternoon with. And this is the detail that should genuinely trouble anyone following this case carefully, regardless of which explanation they find more believable for Warren's 3 o'clock versus 4:30 discrepancy. According to a public statement from her sister Gracie McCormack, posted on behalf of the family, Katie's account of that afternoon is this. Nolan's friends had been calling for him to wrap up his conversation with her so he could return to the boat. Based on that exchange, Katie believed Nolan was heading back toward the boat he had originally arrived on. She assumed the friends calling him over would not leave without him. She made it home safely that day on a different boat entirely, picked up by other family members. She did not personally witness what happened after that final conversation concluded. Now compare that to the friend group's account, delivered by Warren and others. In their version, Nolan told his friends he wanted to stay behind. He refused to get on the boat. He chose to remain on the island to ride back with someone else, possibly connected to Katie's group. He was asked multiple times and declined multiple times. That was his decision. Those two versions point in opposite directions. In Katie's family's account, Nolan believed he was returning to the boat. In the friend group's account, Nolan chose to stay. Somewhere between those two versions is the actual last conversation Nolan Wells ever had, and two separate people who were both physically present for it still, weeks later, describe it in ways that do not match. It is worth being fair to Katie as well, because she has not, as of this recording, given a direct on-camera interview of her own. Everything attributed to her account has come through her sister's public statement, which means we are one layer removed from Katie's actual words, tone, and certainty. Her account, second-hand as it currently is, describes what Nolan told her he believed he was about to do. It does not describe what actually happened to him afterward. That distinction matters, and it is part of why we have been careful to note that her account comes through family rather than presenting it with the same weight as a direct, sworn, on-record statement. But even acknowledging that limitation, the core problem remains. Two separate people, two separate accounts, both describing the same short stretch of time, both pointing in different directions about what Nolan believed he was doing and where he believed he was going. That is not one shaky memory. That is a genuine factual conflict between independent sources about the final recorded movements of a young man who ended up dead in the water. We cannot talk honestly about this case without addressing two pieces of viral evidence that spread to hundreds of thousands of people and turned out to be false. Because separating real evidence from manufactured evidence is exactly the discipline that responsible coverage requires. The first is a photograph. In the days after Nolan's death, a photo surfaced showing him in a swimming pool, surrounded by a group of people, posted alongside a claim that he had actually returned from Horn Island alive, attended a party, been assaulted, and had his body returned to the water afterward. That claim reached hundreds of thousands of viewers within hours. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the family, reposted the image with a caption stating clearly that he did not know whether the underlying claims were fact or rumor, and that his team was investigating all leads. Most people online skipped past that caveat entirely and treated the photo as confirmed proof. Rolling Stone investigated the photograph's actual metadata, corroborated independently through a second source, and determined the image was taken on June 27th, 8 days before the 4th of July, at a separate gathering in Pass Christian, Mississippi. A close friend of Nolan's, who was not even present at that particular event, identified the people in the photo, including Nolan, and confirmed the date. This claim is debunked. It should not circulate as evidence of anything because it is not evidence of anything. The second is a video. Shortly after Nolan's death, a clip began circulating showing what appeared to be an argument on a boat, with a voice that seemed to demand a phone back. Ben Crump referenced this clip publicly on Good Morning America, stating he believed the voice belonged to Nolan. That claim also spread rapidly. Trayson Shepard, a close friend of Nolan's, came forward directly to ABC News and stated plainly that the voice on that recording was his own, not Nolan's, and that it captured a separate altercation with someone else entirely, unrelated to Nolan's situation. Crump has since acknowledged the conflicting accounts and committed to greater care in distinguishing claims from confirmed facts going forward. We are telling you about both of these debunked claims for a specific reason. Letting false information continue circulating unchallenged causes real harm to real people, including people who have not been charged with anything and do not deserve fabricated evidence attached to their names. When a claim is debunked, it is debunked. There is no version of responsible coverage that hedges on that. Now let us turn to the piece of physical evidence that may ultimately matter more than any interview clip or viral video: Nolan's phone. When Nolan was reported missing, his phone was not with him. It had remained with the group of friends who left the island. Christine Wansley has stated that the family used the Life 360 tracking app to locate the device and recovered it from one of the friends' homes. When she and her sister examined it, specifically checking Snapchat, they found no saved photos or videos from July 4th, despite checking before the standard 24-hour expiration window on that content. Christine has stated publicly this struck her as unusual because, by every account, Nolan documented gatherings constantly. That allegation, that content may have been deleted or is otherwise unaccounted for, has not been independently verified through forensic examination as of this recording. It is a claim from a family based on their own review of the device. It is not a confirmed forensic finding. What has happened since is a genuinely significant procedural development. Following a meeting between the family, their legal team, and Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McGrath, both sides agreed to a mutual simultaneous inspection of the phone. Both the family's forensic experts and the state's investigators will examine the device's data at the same time, seeing the same information extracted the same way. When two separate parties independently examine a device, disputes over findings tend to multiply. A joint simultaneous inspection closes that gap before it opens. Legal analysts covering this case have described this arrangement as highly unusual outside of cases already headed towards serious charges. There is also a competing, more mundane explanation for the missing content that deserves to be stated fairly. A friend of Nolan's told ABC News that leaving phones on the boat's dashboard while swimming was completely standard practice within the group, done specifically to protect devices from saltwater. Nolan's phone was reportedly one of roughly 15 left in that same spot that day. Snapchat content can also expire or fail to sync properly depending on connectivity, and cell service on a barrier island 10 miles offshore is notoriously unreliable. The gap in content could have a boring technical explanation rather than a deliberate one. But attorney Tyler Bailey, who has spoken publicly about this case, raised the detail that keeps this question open. Even accepting that phones were commonly left behind, Nolan had reportedly just spent the afternoon with someone he was interested in getting to know better. Most 18-year-olds in that exact situation would want a way to stay in contact afterward. Leaving the phone behind, while not impossible, is at least somewhat inconsistent with what you would expect from someone who intended to see or speak with Katie again. That is not proof of anything. It is one more detail that does not cleanly resolve in either direction, sitting alongside every other unresolved detail in this case. There are two separate autopsies in this case, and understanding why both exist matters. The state of Mississippi conducted an initial examination through the state medical examiner's office shortly after Nolan's identification. Officials have stated that full findings, including toxicology, remain pending. Toxicology analysis routinely takes weeks regardless of public attention, and state labs do not fast-track cases based on media coverage. No official cause or manner of death has been publicly released by the state as of this recording. Separately, at the family's request, Nolan's body was transported to Washington, D.C. for an independent autopsy conducted by a pathologist with no ties to Mississippi. That examination was funded in part by Colin Kaepernick. Funeral costs were covered by Tyler Perry. Both facts were confirmed directly by the family's legal team. Those independent results have also been delayed and have not been publicly released. Until both reports are made public, any claims circulating online about a confirmed cause of death from any source on any side of this case is not supported by released verifiable findings. We want to be direct about that because the speculation online treats determining a drowning as either instantly obvious or as something being deliberately delayed, and neither characterization is accurate. Forensic pathologists examining a body recovered from water look simultaneously at whether fluid in the lungs is consistent with active drowning, whether any trauma occurred before or during or after entry into the water, and what toxicology reveals about substances that may have played a role. When a body has been in water for an extended period, decomposition and environmental factors complicate conclusions that might otherwise be straightforward. That is the documented reality of this kind of forensic work, and it is why both examinations are taking the time they are taking. The fact that two independent examinations exist is itself a meaningful safeguard. If they reach substantially different conclusions, that divergence becomes a significant development in its own right. If they align, that agreement carries real weight precisely because the two were conducted independently of each other, by different pathologists, under different institutional pressures. Following the family's meeting with the district attorney, Ben Crump announced this case will be presented to a grand jury once the sheriff's investigation concludes. This is a real, confirmed development, and it has been widely misunderstood online. A grand jury referral is not the same thing as criminal charges. It means a panel of citizens will review the evidence and determine whether probable cause exists to support an indictment. The district attorney's office has described this as standard procedure for an unnatural or suspicious death, not an announcement that charges are imminent. Authorities have not indicated this is being treated as a criminal investigation into any specific person. Legal analysts covering this case have pointed out that a grand jury is not limited to considering homicide-related charges. It could examine potential obstruction, evidence tampering, or questions about how information was shared or withheld during the investigation, alongside any evidence bearing on how Nolan actually died. That does not mean any of those things occurred. It means those are the categories a grand jury proceeding is structurally capable of considering, depending entirely on what evidence is actually placed before it. There is also a procedural detail worth noting. Under Mississippi law, a victim's family is entitled to receive an incident report within 72 hours of a death. As of the family's meeting with the district attorney, more than a week past that legal window, Christine and Elmore Wansley still had not received that report. That is a documented, on-record fact, stated by the family's attorneys at a public press conference. Sheriff John Ledbetter's public language has shifted noticeably since the earliest days of this case, and that shift deserves to be understood on its own terms rather than overstated or dismissed. In the immediate aftermath of Nolan's recovery, his office stated there was no information at that time suggesting a crime had occurred. That specific phrasing functioned, for many people following the story online, as the moment the case felt like it was being closed before it had truly been opened. In the weeks since, Ledbetter has confirmed his department is conducting formal individual witness interviews. He has confirmed direct contact with the FBI. He has stated that tips from the public have moved the investigation forward in real and meaningful ways. He has called the investigation active and ongoing and acknowledged that his department has received valuable information it did not have in the earliest days. We want to be careful about characterizing that shift. Ledbetter has not walked back his original statement. He has not announced that a crime is now suspected. What he has described is a case that has clearly grown in scope and complexity, requiring more resources, more coordination, and more caution than the earliest public comments suggested. Whether that reflects new evidence pointing towards something more serious, or simply reflects normal investigative process catching up to an unprecedented level of national attention, is not something we can determine from the outside. But the shift itself is real, it is documented, and it is worth understanding separately from any single interview clip. Federal involvement also deserves precision. Horn Island sits within the Gulf Islands National Seashore, which is federal land. That jurisdictional fact is part of why the FBI has any role at all. Ledbetter has confirmed that federal digital forensics resources have assisted in examining phone data, audio, and video connected to the case. He has not stated that the FBI has taken over the investigation. Those are meaningfully different things, and conflating them, as much of the online commentary has done, distorts the actual status of this case. We promised a complete ledger, and that is exactly what we are going to deliver. Separated cleanly by category so you can see for yourself where the evidence actually stands. Confirmed and documented. Nolan Wells was 18 years old and traveled to Horn Island on July 4th with a group of friends. GPS data confirms the boat departed the mainland at 9:56 that morning and left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon. Dispatch audio confirms a distress call regarding a failing bilge pump was placed that afternoon. A Coast Guard call was placed around 11 that night by one of Nolan's friends. Christine Wansley reported her son missing to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office that same night. A National Park Service ranger recovered Nolan's body on July 6th. Identification was made through dental records. The Jackson County coroner stated there were no immediately obvious signs of physical trauma. Both a state autopsy and an independent autopsy are pending final results including toxicology. The district attorney's office has confirmed the case will be presented to a grand jury. A mutual simultaneous phone inspection has been agreed upon by both the family and law enforcement. Disputed, meaning multiple named sources actively disagree, whether Nolan intended to return to the original boat or chose to remain on the island, whether the voice in the viral confrontation video belonged to Nolan or to Trayson Shepard. The internal consistency of Warren's own account, specifically, the contradiction between last visual contact at 3 o'clock and a detailed description of Nolan's location at 4:30. Unresolved and still unknown, the official cause and manner of Nolan's death. Whether any content was deliberately deleted from his phone, whether the grand jury will hear evidence suggesting criminal conduct or confirm a tragic accidental drowning, whether Warren's timeline inconsistency reflects honest memory compression or something investigators will need to press further in a formal setting. That is the complete, honest state of this case. Anyone telling you with total certainty that they already know exactly what happened to Nolan Wells, in either direction, is telling you more than the evidence currently supports. We would be doing this case a disservice if we ended on procedure and left out what all of this has actually done to the people living through it. Trayson Shepard, who came forward publicly to correct the record about the misattributed video, has stated that he and others in the friend group have received death threats since doing so. He took a genuine personal risk correcting misinformation about his own voice being mistaken for a dying friend's, and the result was threats against his safety rather than gratitude for the correction. Christine and Elmore Wansley have described the last several weeks in terms that grief alone does not fully capture. Fabricated, AI-generated videos of Christine have circulated online, targeting her while she was simultaneously planning her son's funeral. That is a genuinely cruel thing happening to a grieving mother, and it has nothing to do with seeking the truth about what happened to Nolan. On July 20th, the family held a homegoing celebration at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, followed by a celebration of life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Christine said publicly she wanted it to feel less like a funeral and more like the kind of gathering Nolan himself would have wanted, one with music and community rather than silence. That is who all of this actually surrounds. Not a viral clip, not a comment section argument about timestamps. An 18-year-old who is gone, and two parents trying to lay their son to rest, while the rest of the internet argues about a 90-minute window on a beach. So let us return to where we started, because we owe you a direct answer to the question this video actually asks. What was the detail everyone missed, and why does it matter? The detail was not a confession. It was not proof of guilt. The detail was structural, and it belonged as much to the interview itself as to the person being interviewed. Warren gave two statements, minutes apart, that cannot both be literally accurate, and the interviewer conducting that conversation did not stop to reconcile them. That is the actual story. Not that a friend was caught, in the dramatic language a lot of the reaction content has used, but that an interview conducted specifically to clear a group's name in the court of public opinion contained an unresolved contradiction that a formal investigative interview conducted by trained law enforcement would not have allowed to pass without a follow-up question. That distinction is why this detail deserves attention, and it is also why it deserves restraint. It is a legitimate, documented reason for investigators to ask Warren directly, in a formal setting, to reconcile those two statements. It is not, on its own, proof that Warren is concealing anything. And it is especially not proof that anyone caused Nolan's death. Those are two very different claims, and this case, and this young man's memory, deserve that difference to be respected. As of this recording, both autopsy results remain pending. The joint phone inspection has not been publicly reported as complete. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has stated the investigation remains active. A grand jury has not yet been convened. Every one of those developments could reshape this case significantly, in either direction. And we will be back, the moment any of them become public, with the same standard we have tried to hold throughout this video. What is confirmed, what is disputed, and what is still simply unknown, kept in their own separate categories for you to weigh for yourself. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He cooked salmon for his parents 2 nights before he died. He was funny, he was well-liked, and by every account that is not currently being argued about online, he made the people around him feel like they mattered. Whatever this investigation ultimately determines, that part of who he was does not get to be debated. Rest easy, Nolan. We will keep watching this one until there is an answer his family can actually stand on. If this video gave you something different from what you have seen elsewhere on this case, if the patience and the precision and the refusal to jump to a conclusion before the evidence supports one actually meant something to you, then subscribing to DAV Crime Records is the single most effective way to make sure this kind of coverage keeps existing. We are a small channel doing careful work in a space that often rewards the opposite. Every subscriber, every like, every person who shares this with someone who cares about getting it right rather than getting it first, that is what keeps us here. Thank you for staying through every word of this. We will see you in the next one.